Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you're well. I've been really paying attention to a lot of podcasters and content creators in the alternative media space that I've got a lot of respect for. And a lot of them are saying the same types of things that we're saying and seeing with the mainstream media and how they might be reporting this, but they're really trying to get people riled up. I think that's their main objective, and they've been talking about how how the global elite maybe would like to see a war. They might not be creating it. You got to put a lot of the blame, or most, all, whatever you want to say on Putin. I'll let you do your own research and come to your own conclusions there. But whether they created or were the motivation, the driving force behind what we're seeing or not, the bottom line is they are stoking the fire. So why is it that I think that a lot of these commentators, they get that part right, but then they have a hard time connecting the dots, like why? And they always kind of revert back to the military industrial complex. And I think that probably has something to do with it. But that's all. Once they get to that point, they're like, oh, big oil companies making money, and then they kind of struggle. That's kind of where their thinking ends and their ability to connect the dots ends, not because of intelligence, obviously, because they just haven't been in the weeds with all the macroeconomic data, or they haven't been in the weeds with the macroeconomics like we have. So I think we've got a huge edge because we understand the Fed, because we understand money printing, quote unquote, because we understand the Eurodollar system, because we understand the push towards authoritarianism, because we understand the media, because we understand the politicians, I think, better, and because we understand how the global economy works. We have a much bigger edge, or a huge edge, when it comes to being able to put the pieces of the puzzle together, connect the dots, and try to figure out, okay, where are the incentives here? So I want to go back to just this outline that I briefly went over with my good friend Chris Irons yesterday, that was nice enough to come on and kind of walk through some, I don't want to say differences we had, but maybe just we see things a little bit differently here and there on the margins as to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. And we were able to discuss that, which I'm very thankful for, because it allowed me to sharpen my views even further. But let's get into this, because I think this really explains and can connect the dots for a lot of you. So when you're listening to, maybe Tim Pool or something like that, you can kind of take it where he leaves off and kind of finish the rest of it, if that makes sense. As far as the idea, you can take that thought experiment, that idea, and where he stops, you can take it, and then you can really complete the idea. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so hopefully this is working. Josh, is this working now? The screen share? Just so you guys know, we had a problem with the screen share. Okay, good. So we've got to think through what the what's a given, right? I always say there are no certainties, there are only probabilities. But I think one thing that we can determine with almost 100% certainty is that politicians' main objective is to be reelected. And the global elite's main objective is to usurp power and control. I think we can, again, not 100%, but we can say that with a high degree of confidence. Okay, well, let's look at the politicians. This is titled What They Want. So I started with the politicians here. And we know they want to be reelected. What's going on in the economy right now? Let's start with the United States. Got high degrees of inflation. Okay, that means you're not going to get reelected. That's political kryptonite. We've got the cerveza sickness. Okay, well, that's going away, but the fact that it's going away would then point to those politicians, or the eye of the public, I think, would then move to the politicians who implemented all of these mandates, and in society at large would start to point at those politicians and say, hey, you were wrong. You were wrong. And we even see Saturday Night Live come out and make fun of this. We talked about this in the last video. So this puts a lot of heat onto the politicians that were very pro-mandate. It makes them look ridiculous. And it makes them look like the authoritarians they are. So that's not good. Another thing, the truckers, with what's happening, or what happened with Trudeau, and it just made Trudeau look like a complete jackass globally, not just in the United States. And I think not just on the right, but on the left, especially when he started freezing bank accounts. There's a lot of things that the authoritarians have done to push and push and push. But I think at certain times they've pushed so far that even people, or a large percentage of the people that may have agreed with them at the beginning, say, whoa, 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 time out. That's too far. I think once you started talking about the kids, the 5-year-olds getting the medicine, that's when a lot of people said, no, that ain't going to happen. And then once they started freezing bank accounts, I think that same group that is at least open to reason said, no, no, no. I might agree with Trudeau. I hate the truckers, but that's too much, because that means they're going to do it to me in the future. And so but this isn't just a Canadian phenomenon. It was happening in the United States. This could have been a global, or maybe still will be a global movement. And the politicians look at what happened to Trudeau and they say, I want no part of that. That means I don't get reelected. Okay, then we know that they want power control. They want to restrict freedom, and they want to control the narrative, because this increases the probability that they will continue to be in a position of authority and maintain, if not improve, that political position they already have. Now, moving down to the global elite, we know very well that they do not like the United States. They didn't really care for Russia. Definitely didn't like Putin, although he is part of their website and everything. They hated Trump. And I think although Trump even spoke at Davos, they did not like him. They really see the United States as kind of a wild card, in my opinion. I think they believe that they can control and influence most of the countries in Europe, but they can obviously control and influence Canada and New Zealand, Australia. But the United States, it depends. If Biden's there, sure, we can control that. If some crazy like Trump, and this is them talking, if he gets in office, who knows where it goes. So we need to squash that to ensure that we're going to be able to achieve our objectives. You guys know what those objectives are. So we need to bring the U.S. down a notch, and especially with the global reserve currency. We talked about that yesterday in a video. So they want the U.S. dollar down. They want anything to do with SWIFT that could make that happen faster. That's definitely something that would help them achieve their objectives. They're going to be incentivized to do that. So central bank digital currency backed by SDR. We talked about that yesterday. They want this to be the reserve currency. Social credit score. We all know that's the direction this whole thing's going, especially with the central bank digital currency. And they want to control the narrative through this misinformation, disinformation, cancel culture. That goes right back to this social credit score. We see this playing out with Rogan. I think we'll see it play out with the Russian narrative. I spoke with Mike Maloney today, and he was talking about the COVID narrative and how they were labeling everyone who had a slightly dissenting view as misinformation, disinformation. I mean, my Rebel, this channel, you guys remember that, got booted off of YouTube. Why? Just because I mentioned the unmentionable, and that was Voldemort. You guys, the main doctor there that you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I was just mentioning him and saying how he contradicted himself, and boom, an hour later, my channel's completely gone off of YouTube. Okay, that's an example of what I think they will most likely do in the future with people who have a slightly different view, or not even a different view, but even question what the mainstream narrative is around Russia and Ukraine. But see, they do this because if they can control the narrative, if they can control the media, they can control the people, especially if they control the money on top of that. And then, this is just kind of a reality here. They want either lower consumption or lower population. And we'll just leave it at that. And then this, again, power control, great reset. So now let's look at this through the lens of war. Say we have World War III. Is inflation going to be a political problem for the Biden administration or any, maybe to some degree, but nowhere near the degree to which inflation would be a political problem if we didn't have, I hate to call it a distraction. Obviously, that's the understatement of all time. But if we had World War III distracting people, and if this would unify them, and what we've seen in the past is the best thing for very unpopular politicians is war. Unites people, and regardless of how much you hate that guy, you want to support him because this is the most critical thing that we as a society can possibly face. So it's diversionary, to say the least. Same thing with the cerveza sickness, same thing with the truckers. And if you don't believe me, just look at how quickly the media switch, and look at how quickly our attention. I mean, how many of you have thought about inflation, the cerveza sickness, or truckers to the degree to which you were 2 weeks ago? How many of you are thinking about it right now to the degree to which you were 2 weeks ago? You're probably not. Why? Because you're looking at potentially nuclear war. And that is a bigger deal than the CPI being at 7.5%. And so every single thing, every single one of their objectives here. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that they created it. I'm saying they are incentivized to push the United States into this conflict. Global elites. We talked about what their objectives are. And if you think about these objectives, again, every single one of them is far easier to accomplish if we are in World War III. And I mean, how do they make sure that we go into World War III? If no certainty, the only probabilities, if this is what they're trying to do. And we know, obviously, the incentives are there. This solves every single one of their problems. So how do they do this? Well, they have to get people to agree. They also have to get people hyper emotional, like we talked about. And they have to make people think the opponent is weak, i.e. Russia. They have to oversimplify things, and they have to dehumanize Russians as though they're all bad guys. So if we go there and drop a nuclear bomb on them, well, we don't feel so bad. The same tactic they use in a movie for character development with the good guy and the bad guy. And so this is an incentive. And how do they achieve this? Well, through the media. So we know they're incentivized to do this through the media. We know they are incentivized to use the media to create World War III. The question is, are they, or will they do it? And that goes back to, you just trying to figure out these people that are behind this potentially. To what degree do you think they would push a war if it meant furthering their objectives, or at what point do you think they would say, no, that's going too far? I believe we should have a great reset agenda, but creating or stoking the fires of World War III is too much. I'm not willing to go that far. Well, let's go back to the cerveza sickness. We know damn well they were willing to lock down the entire globe. We know darn well they were willing to do all of these things that decimated the poor and middle class and will continue to do so for years. We know that they are very willing to cause death and destruction from the standpoint of these lockdowns, increased rate of poverty, not just in the United States and other countries, but especially in developing countries where they couldn't afford stimmy checks. So they're willing to kill and decrease the standard of living for millions and millions and millions of people to usurp power and control to achieve their objectives. We've seen this play out with the cerveza sickness. So is it a stretch to think that they wouldn't be willing to do the same thing as far as taking advantage of a crisis moving forward? Because, well, we're willing to do it with COVID, but nah, we that start, stoking the fires of World War III, that's just too much. I don't know that they have that line in the sand. I would say that again, no certainties, only probabilities, but the probability is high that they believe so wholeheartedly in the end game, if you want to call it that, that the means always justify. The means justify the end. And because that is so important, that whatever you have to do to achieve that, it needs to be done. Food for thought, guys. I don't have all the answers, and I never, ever, ever, ever want to tell you what to think, but I do want to try to encourage you to think. Hopefully that makes sense. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, or enjoy the weekend, guys, and always think critically. Always have a healthy dose of skepticism towards these politicians, the media, global elite. Always stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and we'll see you in the next video.